Is your comic collecting hobby self-sustaining? Or do you have it as a goal to someday get to the point where your collection pays for itself? Today, we'll talk about that topic, and I'll share some examples in my own collecting life where I've had some success and the steps I took to make it possible. Check it out. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Chris, and this is Northgarden Comics. So, is your comic collecting hobby self-sustaining? That is, does it pay for itself? And what I mean by that is, when you buy comic supplies, omnibus, whatever it is that you collect, do you simply pull money out of your pocket and buy those things? Or have you gotten to the point where your hobby somehow, in some way, generates some form of income for you, and it's those resources that you use to then turn around and buy more comics and supplies and other collectibles and things? I will admit up front that I am not at that point. I have been collecting for a little over 30 years, and for almost the entire time, it's been probably like many of us, where I have a job, I make money, and I want to buy things like comic books, and so I have a certain amount of money that I spend on comics, and even now, 30 plus years later, that is a fixed amount. It's gone up over time, but it's fixed, and from that fixed monthly amount, I have to buy my new comics, my back issues, my supplies, and now, more recently, I've started to dip into the oversized hardcovers and the omnibus. And that endeavor right there has caused me to really start to think about this concept of having the hobby pay for itself. Because if you want to buy something like an omnibus or an oversized hardcover, or even some of the comic book supplies, you're talking a larger amount of money all at one time. And it's very different than going and saying, I'm going to carve out $10, $15 and go to this comic book show and buy $10 or $15 books, or 20, 30, 50-cent books. It's harder to achieve that. When you're talking an oversized hardcover, it could be $35, $40. An omnibus could cost you $50 to $75, and that's if you're getting it at half off. So much spendier items when you start to talk about some of those things. And I know for a long time I had wrestled with, how do I make choices in a particular month? Do I cut back on my new comics that I want that month so that I can save that amount of money to get those supplies, or to put it towards that omnibus or that oversized hardcover? It's always a trade-off conversation. And I guess I don't even want to try to set up the expectation or try to talk simply about where it's 100% paying for itself, where every single thing you or I would buy in a given month is paid for by the hobby. But even if that can be done in isolated instances where there's a particular thing you want, or something you're going after, or maybe it's a show you're going to attend, but some more finite way that you could point to say, yep, my comic collecting hobby enabled me to achieve this goal, or to buy that key book, or whatever it is that you're striving for. And I think that's a more manageable, at least first step. I think for most of us, we'll never get to the point where 100% of what we buy is supported by the hobby. So I guess I'm lowering the bar a little bit to say, how can you and I, maybe as more everyday collectors, still achieve some of that, where we could stretch our comic collecting dollar a little bit further than perhaps it could otherwise go if it was just that monthly budgeted amount. So I'm going to share some of my own experiences and how I got to that point where I could do that a little bit, and I'll show you some examples of what I've achieved or what I've gotten as the hobby has been able to support itself in these limited ways. But before I get too much further, I do want to pause and say, if you like this kind of content, please take just a second, hit that subscribe button. And as you watch, if you see something you like, give it a thumbs up. And of course, let me know your thoughts and questions down below. On that last topic of thoughts and questions, please, if you've had success in this area, I definitely want to learn from those of you who have done this before. I am one person who happens to put myself in front of a camera and talk to you about these things. So that doesn't mean I've got all the best ideas or that I've got it all figured out. So let me know how you've achieved success in supporting it, the hobby supporting itself, self-sustaining, whatever term you want to use, or how it's allowed you to stretch further and achieve goals that you've set for yourself. how did I get into this to begin with? Or how did I start thinking about this to begin with? It didn't come naturally. So really there's two ways that I have found to be able to generate income and then use that money to buy collectibles. One is to sell things that I already have, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then two, it is going to be looking for things to buy and then turn around and sell. So let's kind of take those in order. The first one, selling things that you already have. I don't know about you, but that is easier said than done. I hear about people downsizing their collection, trimming back, selling off runs, keys, things like that. And it looks so easy, or they make it sound so easy, but I have not found that to be my experience. For example, about 5 years ago is when I started really looking for comics at garage sales. And I would find books sometimes that were not titles that I was normally collecting. Maybe it's DC stuff, for example, because I'm primarily a Marvel collector, but I would find some DC books. Maybe they're $1 a piece. Maybe they're even some minor keys or moderate keys, and I'd get them. And even I'm thinking, oh, I could turn around and sell those things. But once they're in my collection, I have a much harder time wanting to then let go of it, or being willing to let go of it. And so I would accumulate comics and not really get rid of anything. Even those things that I have now in my collection, say like, well, I could sell that. Like, oh, it's harder to do that than what it sounds like on the surface. And what got me to the point of really thinking differently about that, though, was one, a very natural thing that happens to all of us at some point or another. You run out of space. You can see part of my shelves behind me here. I have these two, what do you call, like metro racks, so just that wire metal shelving. And I've got, it's like a total of 40 short boxes altogether, 20 on each one. And that's the space I've got. Yes, I could overflow and, go into a closet or something like that. But for all practical purposes, that's where my collection lives. And so that's the space I've got to contain it within. And it was probably within the last year that I started to brush up against the limit of that. And it made me realize, I've got to make some decisions, because I am going to continue to buy comics, back issues, new things, and I'm really running out of place to put them. So it forced me to start to think about the collection that I have already, to say, what would I rather have, this book or that book, this title or that title, this run or that run? And I was able to go through and pull some things out and free up some space. And the books that I pulled out, I didn't necessarily think about selling, because they weren't keys. They're just your everyday run fillers. And I'm not a vendor where I'm going and selling books at shows and things like that. So maybe there's eBay, maybe Facebook Marketplace, but I really wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking more like I could give some of these away and maybe at some point sell some of these things. But that was the first thing that got me really to the point where I was willing to make a choice between one book over another. And then it went a little bit further, and I started to think about some of those more significant books that I own, that while they're cool to have in my collection, that's really all it is. It has no significant personal value to me. If it's a character or a title or something that I'm not at all collecting and don't know anything about, it just happens to be a key book, and it's like all I have is the bragging rights that I found it for inexpensive. And so it's just taking up space, and so I'd be willing to consider selling that. And as I looked at some of those books, at the same time, I have been wanting to get more Mylar for my books. Most of the things I have are polypropylene, your standard backing board, been that way for decades. And I'm not anti-polypropylene in any way, right? But I, at the same time, got to admit that if nothing else, Mylar looks so much nicer. And we know that it's going to last as a storage material for your comic books. And so, like many collectors, I want to get more Mylar, but Mylar is so expensive. You can buy it at some stores, but there's a pretty significant markup on it. The most inexpensive way to buy it is to get it directly from the manufacturer, like Gerber. And even then, to buy Mylar bags and boards off of Gerber, you've got to spend a minimum $100 before they'll even take your order. And so that was going to be something that I was going to have to save up for, or, you know, figure out some way to do this. And that was where I started to really connect these ideas together to say, I've got books that might have some value to someone else, and I've got a want for some of these supplies. They're going to cost me more than what I want to pull out of my monthly budget. So why don't I work on a swap? And so my first endeavor into selling books was, I had some runs of books that I had gotten at garage sales and things like that for like 50 cents, $1 a piece for those books, sold those, and I was able to place an order online through Gerber to get Mylar bags and boards. And I won't obviously show you all of them because they all look the same, but I got like 400 the Mylite 2s and the halfback backing boards. And that is going to allow me to go through some of my books, not all of them, but starting with the oldest and then working my way forward, I'll be able to start to rebag and board some of those and put them in Mylar. So that was something I wanted to get, supplies. And that was a motivator that pushed me enough to get to the point to say, I'd be willing to sell some of those books. The other thing that's a motivator for me in pushing me to let go of some books I have is that there's something else I want more. It sounds really simple, right? But I have been lucky enough to find some pretty cool key books in my various comic book adventures, things that would sell for a lot more than what I purchased them for, but again, not particularly attached to the character, the story, the run, other than simply to say, hey, isn't it cool that I found this key book or that key book for $1.50, something like that. And I realized that there were other things. You heard me mention before, I want to get more into these oversized hardcovers and omnibus, and there's some of those that I wanted more than just having those keys sitting in a short box here, rarely, if ever, seeing the light of day. And so the most recent thing I've done is purchase some oversized hardcovers that didn't touch my monthly budget. This was all essentially free, right? I sold some books and I was able to buy these. A few months ago, I started getting into the Transformers collected editions from IDW, and I started with Phase 2, and I got the first couple based on, you know, Christmas birthday present type of deal, and then there were like 9 more that I wanted to get, and I'm actually only 2 hardcovers away from that, having that entire Phase 2 collection now, and most of it is thanks to this idea of the hobby supporting itself. So I sold some books, again, was able to sell them for much, much more money than what I paid for them initially. And then these 4 collected editions for Transformers, I was able to order off of cheapgraphicnovels.com. These are $35 to $40 a piece, and basically got them for free. So that was a huge gain for me. And if you're wondering if I have any of that remorse from selling those other books, not at all. I haven't given it a second thought selling those books because these are so cool to me and I wanted these so much more. Now, that being said, I will say, don't jump to start just selling books, because I have in my life, not so much with comic books, but with other things in my life, without necessity, I jumped to the conclusion that I don't want this anymore, I don't need it anymore, get rid of it. Either it's you know, depending on what it is, you either threw it away, you donated it, you sold it, whatever that was, only later to regret ever having let that go. And so don't run to do this. You have to be sure in your mind that this is what you want to do, because there's no turning back. And I've read and heard from collectors too many times where they get rid of things, they sell off a run or a key or something like that, and now they look back and go, oh, why did I ever do that? So don't be quick to just get rid of things unless, you know, be convinced that you're ready to let go of those things. And again, remember, for me, the way this really came about, the trigger for this was that I ran out of space. And so I was forced to make some decisions. And I don't know how much selling and this, you know, upgrading to oversized hardcovers or things like that I would have done had I not been first put in that position where I was running out of room. like I said, it's a lot harder to let go of things if there's no pressure to. And honestly, if my space were completely unlimited, I'd probably be even slower to let go of some of those books, just because, you know, it may not be important to you today, but maybe somewhere down the road it will be. So I don't get rid of comics just to get rid of them. It's usually I need to trade off because I'm out of space, or there's something that I want even more. One other thing that I'll say about how you can work to have the hobby support itself a little bit more than perhaps it does for you today, and this is the other thing I do, I'm gonna hit a point where I don't want to get rid of any more books, that the books in my collection are really the books I want. So I'm gonna run out of things to go through to pull out and say, I'll sell this one now, I'll sell that one. But the other thing, and I kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'll say it more explicitly now, it's whenever you go out hunting for books for yourself, whether that be a local shop or a convention, a show, garage sailing, flea markets, wherever you go to buy comic books, keep an eye out for books that could be potential sellers. Now, of course, there's always that risk that once you buy it, then you want to keep it in your collection, and I get it, then we wind up just accumulating. But if you can keep an eye out for those books that aren't important to you, character, title, run, whatever the case may be, but might be valuable to somebody else, then those can be opportunities for you to make some money off of those books and then use that to buy books that are going to be more significant to you. Now, that'll maybe force you to learn some things about books that you don't currently collect, and maybe that's interesting to you, maybe not, but it'll also expand your comic knowledge, and the more you know, the more quickly you'll be able to identify those books as you're hunting through long boxes. And I will say that I enjoy doing that when it's fun. I have respect and appreciation for people who make their living off of buying and selling comic books, but that's not what I want to do. I really just enjoy the hobby as a collector. So I'm very thankful that I have a job that supports me and meets my needs, and that really I can treat this hobby just like that. It's just a hobby. And so when I look for comics at a store or a convention, things to potentially sell, there's no pressure. I don't have to find something that I can sell. If I do, great. But if I don't, no big deal, right? So keep all of what I'm saying in context, right? These are all very first world problems. So if you get out there, keep an eye out for those books that you might be able to turn around and sell for a profit, because then, yeah, maybe it's supplies, maybe it's oversized hardcovers, maybe it's omnibus, maybe it's a key book that you've been wanting to add to your collection. If there's something you really want and your regular budget doesn't allow for you to get it, yes, can you save over a period of time? Sure, but there might be some other creative ways that you can explore that might help you achieve those goals. So as I wrap this up, just want to say, again, let me know your thoughts on this topic. Have you made income off your comics before that would have allowed you to expand your collection, achieve certain collecting goals that if you hadn't done those things, you wouldn't have been able to achieve, or they would have taken much longer? Love to hear about those things in the comments down below. All right, that's going to do it for me, and that's going to do it for this topic on having the hobby support itself. I hope there was something here helpful for you. If you've hung in there this long and you haven't already done so, please hit that subscribe button. If you liked what you saw, give it a thumbs up. And again, let me know your comments down below. If you're not ready for the YouTube fun to be done, I've got a couple hand-selected videos here for you to check out. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.